Okay, so ready to dive in. Today it's all about natural language processing. You guys sent some really interesting stuff over articles, research papers. I even saw some of your own notes in there.
Wow, yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading on this lately.
And it looks like you're really interested in how NLP is going to shape the future of work, especially, well, for architects and developers, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of where my head's at.
Makes sense. I mean, you are one yourself, right?
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we'll focus on real-world examples. How's this tech actually being used? What's the tech behind it all? And of course, what it all means for you, both as someone who's building these systems and as, well, just a regular consumer, like all of us.
One of the things that really struck me from all the stuff you sent over is this idea of the hybrid professional. It's not just about robots taking over, but about people who can blend their tech skills with, well, those uniquely human skills.
Right, right. Finding that balance.
Yeah. And NLP is a huge part of that whole shift.
It really is. It's
Really?
everywhere you look these days. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. It's from how we Google stuff to how companies handle customer service, even stuff we don't even think about.
It's kind of crazy when you stop and think about it.
Totally. One of the sources you sent, decoding language, that one.
Yeah, I think I remember that one.
It traces this whole history of NLP, like all the way back to those early systems, like ELIZA. That was back in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading about that. It could hold a basic conversation, but it was super limited, right?
Yeah, Eliza, it was all about pattern matching. Pre-programmed responses. It was revolutionary at the time, but really it didn't understand language the way we do. Not even close.
Right. It was more like clever programming than actual understanding.
Exactly.
So then things started to change when statistical NLP came along. That was in the 80s and 90s. Instead of relying on those preset rules, systems started actually learning from mountains of language data.
Right.
And then in the 2000s, boom, deep learning just changed everything. Yeah. It completely revolutionized the field.
Yeah.
And that's where we get these really sophisticated models like BERT and GPT.
And they can do some pretty incredible things like understanding context, generating text that sounds like a human wrote it. It's almost like these models are starting to mirror how our brains work, going from just recognizing words to actually getting grammar and meaning.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so that's the history, the evolution, like how we got to where we are now. But let's get down to brass tacks. You send a
Yeah.
bunch of case studies. Let's dive into those. One that really jumped out at me was the one about Tech Corp. They went all in on digital transformation.
Yeah, Tech Corp. It's fictional, but it really shows what's possible. They implemented AI-powered project management, moved to those cross-functional teams, and get this, they invested heavily in training their employees, both the technical stuff and the non-technical stuff, like communication and all that.
And they saw some huge benefits, didn't they? Like what? Increased productivity, happier employees.
Yeah, for sure. The company became way more agile, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses. There are some bumps along the way, especially when it came to managing a more distributed workforce. It's a big cultural shift.
That makes sense. Yeah, it highlights the human side of all this. Can't just forget about the people.
Totally. And another case study that really highlights this is the Netflix one.
Oh, yeah, the one about how they decide what to make.
Yep, that's the one. They use AI to analyze mountains of viewer data. But guess what? Ultimately, it's human creativity, human intuition that makes the final call on what projects actually get greenlit.
So it's not about replacing human judgment, but about giving people better data to make those judgments even sharper.
Exactly.
Speaking of judgment, that case study about that global retail company using GPT-3 for customer support, that's a good reminder that AI has its limits.
Yeah, for sure. They had a lot of success using GPT-3 for those real-time customer interactions, but there were some serious challenges they had to overcome, like making sure that the chatbot could understand all sorts of different queries, from all different types of people, and then keeping up with the context of a conversation, not just responding to each question in isolation, but actually remembering what was said before.
Oh, yeah, so it doesn't sound like a robot just spitting out canned responses.
Exactly. And then, of course, making sure the chatbot could handle sensitive customer issues appropriately. Like, you don't want a bot giving bad advice or saying the wrong thing at the wrong time.
I could see how that would be tricky. Did they do anything specific to address those challenges?
Oh, absolutely. They had to train the model on a massive data set of real customer interactions just to make sure it could handle all sorts of different questions and situations. And then they use some really clever algorithms to help the chatbot keep track of the conversation, remember previous interactions, and all that.
To make it feel more natural, more like a real conversation.
Exactly. And to handle those sensitive situations, they had humans overseeing things, especially for those really complex or emotionally charged interactions.
Okay, so it sounds like a blend of high-tech and human touch is what made it work.
That's a good way to put it.
Which brings us to those building blocks for architects and developers. What really stood out to you in the material you sent?
Well, one thing that kept popping up was that it's not just about knowing how to use specific tools. It's more about having what they call technical fluency, like being able to adapt and integrate different technologies from simple Excel macros to, really complex project management workflows. And then, of course, understanding cybersecurity and digital ethics. That goes without saying.
Right, it's not enough to just know how to use a hammer. You got to know when to use a screwdriver, when to use a wrench.
Exactly. It's about the bigger picture.
Okay, so within that technical fluency thing, what are some of the key NLP concepts that architects and developers should really understand?
One that's super important for building those natural-sounding chatbots and virtual assistants is coreference resolution.
Coreference resolution.
Yeah, it's basically teaching a computer to understand that he refers to John from an earlier part of the conversation.
Oh, okay, I see.
It sounds simple, but it's super tricky to program. And it's absolutely essential if you want to build systems that can actually follow along with the conversation.
It's like teaching a computer to read between the lines.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, so aside from building chatbots, what are some other ways architects and developers can use NLP in their work? Like any cool real-world examples?
Oh, yeah. There's a ton of potential in design automation. Like, imagine being able to describe a building using just normal language, and then, bam, the AI generates a preliminary design based on what you said.
Whoa, that's wild.
Or using NLP to analyze tons of architectural plans to see patterns and trends that could help inform your own design decisions.
It's like AI is becoming a design partner.
In a way, yeah.
That's pretty amazing. It feels like we're on the edge of something huge here.
Uh,
But, it's not all about the fancy algorithms and futuristic stuff. We got to think about the consumer side of things, too.
Absolutely. All these advances in NLP are changing how we interact with technology every day. From how we search for information to how we shop online, it's all connected.
So for someone like me who's not building these systems but using them all the time, what do I need to be aware of? What's the key takeaway here?
The key takeaway is that digital literacy is no longer optional. It's essential. It's like the price of admission for participating in this increasingly digital world. And it's not just about knowing how to use a computer. It's about knowing how to find information online, evaluate it, and make sense of it all. It's about being able to create your own digital content and share it effectively. And it's about knowing how to communicate and collaborate in those virtual spaces.
It's like we need a whole new set of skills just to keep up.
Exactly. And as the lines between the physical world and the digital world keep blurring, emotional intelligence is more important than ever.
Emotional intelligence. You mean like being aware of my own emotions?
That's part of it. But it's also about understanding your online presence, how you come across to others, and being able to adjust your communication style depending on the platform and who you're talking to.
So it's like you're building a digital version of yourself that needs to be just as savvy and in tune with people as your real-world self.
You got it. And then there's this whole idea of personal branding for the hybrid professional, which we talked about earlier. It's not enough to just list your skills on a resume anymore. You got to showcase your projects, quantify your achievements, and use platforms like LinkedIn strategically to connect with opportunities.
It's like you're building an online portfolio of your expertise.
Right. And it needs to be constantly evolving as you learn new skills and take on new challenges.
It sounds like you're saying we all need to become lifelong learners, always adapting and upgrading our skills to keep up with the pace of change.
That's the key. And one of the biggest changes on the horizon is the fading of the traditional 9-to-5 workday.
Here's where things get really interesting.
Definitely. With remote work becoming more common and AI automating more tasks, we're moving toward a more flexible, asynchronous way of working. It's not just about where we work, but when we work.
So are you saying the 9 to 5 is going extinct? What would that even look like?
That's a question we'll explore in part 2 of this deep dive. But for now, it's worth thinking about how this shift might impact you, both as a professional and as an individual.
It's a lot to think about, but also super exciting. So for all of our listeners out there, take a moment to ponder these questions. We'll be back with more insights and practical tips in part 2.
Yeah, it really is a lot to think about. But before we get into what a world without the traditional 9 to 5 might actually look like, let's kind of zoom out for a second. If you look at the history of work, there's this pattern of continuous evolution. I mean, think about it. We went from agriculture to industry to the digital age we're in now, and each of those eras brought massive changes, like how we work, the skills we need, even how companies are structured.
And it feels like we're in the middle of another one of those major transformations, right? Like a whole new era.
Definitely. And this time it's driven by things like AI and automation. But here's the interesting thing. It's not just about machines replacing us completely, like the Terminator scenario. It's more about humans and machines, like teaming up, each playing to their strengths.
Right, like a partnership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like one of the sources you sent, Humanity Elevated, it talks about this idea of a humanity elevated future of work. It's not about being afraid of AI. It's about seeing it as a tool that can actually help us be more productive, more creative, even improve our well-being.
So how do we prepare for this humanity elevated future? Like, what are the specific skills and mindsets we need to develop?
Well, we touched on digital literacy earlier, and it's worth hitting that again. I mean, it's more than just basic computer skills. It's really about understanding those digital tools and platforms, the concepts behind them. It's the fluency you need to thrive in a world that's, well, becoming increasingly digital first.
Right, so things like finding good information online, evaluating sources, creating your own digital content, being able to communicate and work together effectively online.
Exactly. It's that whole toolkit. But you can't just stop at tech skills.
There's got to be more to it than that.
Right. You got to pair those digital skills with what we often call soft skills or human skills. Things like critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, emotional intelligence, which we talked about earlier, and just being able to communicate clearly.
So this blend of like tech know-how and human qualities, that's what's going to define success going forward.
That's it in a nutshell. We bring our uniquely human strengths to the table, and technology helps us leverage those strengths, make them even more powerful.
I like that. So technology doesn't replace us, it enhances us.
Exactly. And that leads us to another really important part of preparing for the future of work, building your personal brand.
Yeah, we talked about this a bit earlier, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper.
Definitely. And it's more than just having a polished resume. It's about putting yourself out there, establishing yourself as a thought leader, building your network, sharing your work and your ideas.
You know, one thing I've noticed is that content creation seems to be a big part of personal branding these days. Is everyone expected to be a blogger or influencer now?
Not necessarily, but being able to clearly express your ideas, share what you know, and engage with people online, that's definitely becoming more and more valuable. And it's not just about promoting yourself, it's about adding to the conversation, showing that you're an expert, that you have something valuable to contribute.
Okay, so even for someone like me who's not building these NLP systems, understanding these concepts is still super important for navigating this new world of work, right? But it can feel kind of overwhelming. Like, where do we even begin?
One of your sources, Humanity Elevated, it lays out a really helpful framework for action planning. The first step is self-assessment. Just take a look at what you're good at right now and think about where you want to go in your career. What do you want to be doing 5, 10 years from now?
So knowing your starting point and your destination.
Exactly. Then you do a skills gap analysis. Basically, compare your current skills to the skills that are in demand, either in your field overall or for specific roles that you're interested in. That'll help you figure out where you might need to upskill or reskill.
Makes sense. It's
Yeah.
about making sure you're keeping pace with what the market is looking for.
Exactly. And the final step is creating a personalized learning plan. Figure out how you're actually going to acquire those skills. That could mean online courses, workshops, certifications, maybe even finding a mentor.
So taking that gap analysis and turning it into action. And it sounds like this whole lifelong learning thing is more important than ever.
It's essential. The world is changing so fast that the idea of learning one thing and coasting on that for the rest of your career, that's just not realistic anymore.
Right. It's got to be a continuous process of learning and adapting.
Exactly. To really
Right.
thrive in this dynamic environment, you got to be curious, you got to be adaptable, and you got to be constantly seeking out new knowledge and experiences. Never stop learning.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But even beyond skills and learning, it seems like there's a certain mindset we need to navigate all this change.
Totally. One of the most important qualities is resilience. It's that ability to bounce back from setbacks, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to stay positive even when things get tough.
Resilience, that makes sense. The world of work is moving so fast, we've got to be able to roll with the punches. But how do we build that resilience? Like, are there specific things we can do?
Yeah, for sure. It's about developing healthy coping mechanisms. Having a strong support network, friends, family, colleagues who can help you through tough times, and prioritizing your own well-being. Taking care of yourself mentally and physically. That's what gives you the strength to show up as your best self, even when things are challenging.
It's like building that inner strength so you can weather any storm. Which brings us to another big thing, managing our digital well-being.
That's
We've
huge.
talked about using tech effectively, but all this connectivity, all this information coming at us all the time, it can be a lot.
It really can. The pressure to always be on, the blurring of boundaries between work and personal life, it can definitely take a toll.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we stay connected without getting totally overwhelmed?
It's about using technology intentionally, setting boundaries, being mindful of how much time you're spending in front of a screen, and making sure you disconnect regularly. Give yourself time to recharge.
It's like anything else, you need moderation.
Exactly. And, this whole idea of work-life balance is kind of evolving too, especially with the rise of remote and hybrid work.
How so?
Well, it's shifting more towards work-life integration, where the lines between work and life are more fluid. It's less about separating them into these neat little boxes and more about finding ways to blend them together in a way that works for you.
So it's less about balancing them and more about integrating them.
Right. It's about designing a lifestyle that includes work in a way that feels natural and fulfilling, not just trying to cram it into a specific time slot.
Okay, so we've talked about digital literacy, resilience, personal branding, the shift from work-life balance to work-life integration, and managing our digital well-being. It's a lot to take in. But how does all this connect back to our conversation about NLP and the future of work?
Well, NLP is playing a big role in shaping this new world of work. I mean, think about it. It's powering the tools that let us communicate and work together effectively online. It's automating tasks so we can focus on the more strategic and creative stuff. It's even helping us personalize our work experiences, find more meaning and purpose in what we do.
That's fascinating. So NLP isn't just a technology. It's like a catalyst for a whole new way of thinking about work, about life, about everything.
You got it. And as we continue developing and integrating these powerful technologies, it's super important to remember that we have a choice in how we shape this future. It's not predetermined.
Right. We can't just blindly adopt new tech without thinking about the potential downsides,
Yeah,
like the ethical implications, the impact on individuals and society as a whole.
exactly. It's about using these tools responsibly and ethically to create a future of work that benefits everyone. That's truly humanity elevated, like your source put it.
Humanity elevated. I love that. It's about using technology to bring out the best in us, to solve those big, complex problems, and to create a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
Well said. And that brings us back to that question we posed earlier. What would a world without the traditional 9 to 5 actually look like?
Right, like in concrete terms.
Yeah.
With all these changes swirling around, it's hard to picture what work will even be like 5 or 10 years from now, let alone further out than that.
It really does spark the imagination. What if work wasn't tied to a specific place or a set schedule? What if you could design your workday around your own needs and preferences? What if technology could help you find work that aligns with your passions, that gives you a sense of purpose?
It sounds kind of utopian. Are these just futuristic fantasies? Or are there signs that we're actually moving in this direction?
Well, there are some really interesting trends emerging that suggest this might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. One that's gaining a lot of momentum is this idea of the meta workplace, which you mentioned earlier. It's still early days, but it has the potential to totally transform how we think about work.
Meta workplace. Remind me what that means again. Sounds familiar, but
Picture this. A totally integrated physical and virtual work environment, a space that seamlessly blends the digital and the physical, using things like augmented reality, virtual reality, those advanced collaboration tools to create this totally immersive experience.
okay, now that is sounding pretty futuristic.
Ah.
I can barely manage my email inbox. I don't know if I'm ready for a VR office just yet.
I hear you. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But for you, as an architect and a developer, this concept is super relevant. You're not just designing buildings anymore. You're designing these whole digital ecosystems for work and collaboration.
That's a cool way to think about it. So it's not just about the physical space anymore. It's also about the digital space, the user experience, and how those two worlds come together to create an environment that's engaging and productive.
Exactly. And that requires a whole new set of skills and considerations. It's not just about physical space anymore. It's about digital space, user experience design, data privacy, and the ethical implications of these immersive technologies.
Wow, it's like architecture is merging with software development to create these hybrid spaces. And it really shows you just how much the world of work is changing. It's not just about what we do, it's about where we do it, the tools we use, and how we work together.
Exactly. And it's incredibly exciting to think about all the possibilities, but we got to approach these advances thoughtfully, ethically. We have a responsibility to get this right.
Couldn't agree more. We can't just jump headfirst into new technology without considering the potential downsides, the unintended consequences.
You got it. So, as we explore this world without the traditional 9 to 5, let's make sure we're keeping those ethical considerations front and center.
Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about digital literacy, resilience, personal branding, the shift towards work-life integration, the rise of the meta workplace, and the importance of ethical considerations. It's a lot to digest. But how does this all come together for someone like me, an architect and developer trying to navigate this crazy, constantly changing world?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we'll dive into in part 3 of this deep dive. We'll look specifically at how these trends are impacting the world of architecture and software development, and we'll explore some practical steps you can take to not just survive, but thrive in this new world of work.
Sounds good. All right, listeners, don't miss part 3 where we'll get even more specific and actionable. Okay, we're back. Final part of our deep dive. NLP and the future of work. Feels like we've gone through a whole masterclass here. Evolution of NLP, that meta workplace concept, and how it's all changing things for the people building the tech and, well, all of us using it every day.
And now we zero in on you specifically, right? Architect, developer, navigating this world that just keeps changing. How are these trends hitting your field? What can you do to, not just keep up, but really thrive?
So one thing that keeps popping up in all this stuff is design automation, driven by NLP, of course. It almost blows my mind. Like someday I could just describe a building, just say what I want, and the AI spits out a design. Is that really coming?
It's closer than you think, honestly. NLP is already being used to automate some parts of design, like generating floor plans from specific parameters, creating 3D models just from text descriptions, and it's only going to get more sophisticated.
That's exciting, but kind of scary too, right? As an architect, part of the fun is that creative process. Sketching, refining designs. If AI takes over, what's left for us?
It's not about replacement, it's about augmentation. Imagine using NLP tools to try out tons of design options quickly, test different materials, layouts, even get visualizations based on client feedback instantly. That frees you up from the high-level stuff, the creative vision, the strategy, the stuff only humans can do.
So, less grunt work, more big picture thinking. I can get behind that. And I bet this applies to software development too. Code generation, bug finding, all that.
Absolutely. NLP is already generating code from plain English descriptions, saves a ton of time. And there are tools using NLP to analyze code, catch bugs, find vulnerabilities before they blow up.
That's like having an AI debugger, always watching your back. That's pretty awesome. But beyond these specific tools, what kind of mindset, what skills do architects and developers need in this NLP-driven future?
Digital literacy, tech fluency, we've talked about those. But for you, design thinking is crucial. It's that human-centered way of solving problems. Empathy, experimentation, always refining the solution.
Design thinking. I hear it tossed around, but not sure I really get it. Break it down for me.
It's about understanding your users deeply. For you, that's clients, the people who live or work in those buildings, the folks using your software. You got to put yourself in their shoes. What are their needs, their frustrations? Then you design solutions that really work for them.
So it's not just about cool tech or a pretty building. It's about solving real problems, making people's lives better.
Exactly. And NLP can actually help you understand those needs. Analyze customer feedback, online reviews, even social media chatter. What are people saying about your work? What do they want?
It's like using NLP to tap into this collective intelligence. Learn from what people are actually saying, then use that to make your designs, your software, even better. That's powerful stuff.
And as the lines between physical and digital blur, this is key. Getting insights from both worlds, designing experiences that blend them seamlessly.
So it's more than just the tech skills. It's this whole approach, this human-centered design philosophy that's crucial. Understanding what people need, what they want, then using NLP to build things that make life better,
You got it. And don't forget, the future isn't something that just happens to us. We create it. Architects, developers, you have the power to shape this future. Use NLP to build a world that's sustainable, equitable, more fulfilling for everyone.
That's pretty inspiring. And it ties back to that idea humanity elevated. Using technology to amplify our best selves, solve tough problems, build a future we can all be proud of.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap this deep dive, here's my takeaway, Frano. Embrace the possibilities. Stay curious, keep learning. Use your skills, your vision to create a future of work that truly elevates us all.
I like it. And for our listeners, hope this got you thinking. World of NLP, the future of work, it's a lot, but it's exciting stuff. Until next time, keep learning, keep innovating, and keep building that future.